Hey everyone, it's Joe Glines here in Dallas, Texas.
Yeah, and Jackie here from Copenhagen, Denmark.
And first off, let me just apologize a bit. I have a cold, so I'm a little rough around the edges when I talk, and I'll try to hit that mute button when I start coughing, but loads of fun. So today's short talk in AutoHotkey, we were going to talk about pseudocode, writing pseudocode, and how helpful it can be. And by the way, Maestriath, author of AutoHotkey Studio, is also kind of in the background. He might chime in here and there, just so you know. You don't get freaked out when the third person shows up out of nowhere. Anyway, so pseudocode, like it's not code, right? It's more kind of literally what you need to do. So if I'm writing a big script, and even it's just a thought process of like, okay, I have an outline in my head of what I need to do, I will literally write 4 to 5 lines of, and first I need to open the file, and then I need to read it in and loop over it, and then I need to parse on this, and then I need to extract data and save file. And those are like close to the words I'd actually write. And then after I do that, I think about it a little bit more, and then I'll go back and I'll take, the first line and I'll start writing often the function, but I'll do something to actually start executing that. And as I do it, what I do is I delete the pseudocode and replace it with real code. Jackie, you were mentioning something on the forum. What were you saying?
Yeah, I'd say that for smaller projects, most people probably do it in their head, right? Where in any other way you do it, you would probably have a plan beforehand. How am I gonna make the next task happen or whatever? But yeah, on the forum, at least when I started reading it, I saw a good amount of people that were helping newer users use the exact same thing as you mentioned, that instead of actually writing a working piece of code for people, whatever the reason was, if it was just an attempt to be in that philosophy that at least AutoHotkey has, and I think a lot of programming languages has, that if you haven't yet shown any effort, we would like to help you, but we're not just gonna write the code for you. So they would instead give them some kind of pseudocode, right? Where first hotkey, then loop, then this, then that. And however you put it, that is pseudocode. It's not actually AutoHotkey's syntax, but it is kind of script flow that you're helping with.
Yep.
So, yeah.
No, and honestly, when people ask me for help in doing stuff, normally that's the level I will do is I help them talk through, or I'll point them to a resource like, here's what you can go look at this example. But I really feel when you give them the pseudocode, they have to really learn how to do the coding, right? Because I don't want to do their work for them, right? That's one thing it's not that I'm not a caring person. I just feel unless you actually do it yourself, you never learn, right? So that's why I have that kind of a feeling.
Yeah, and I'm inclined that I've taken myself in doing it a lot with when trying to help. It's much easier for me to just write it. I know it works. I can give you something that I know work, and thereby the stuff that I'm saying that you need to do or that you need to learn or whatever, I can actually show that that would work by doing real code. But I have, at least at times, tried to not just write them a working example. And that's maybe a few years ago now, because now I'm not helping as much as it was. But at some point, some people, and it might just be a feeling you have when sitting here and reading it, and you're like, either they seem like they get it, and thereby pseudocode is good enough help for them, or they, and it's again, it's just some kind of feeling you get, right? It seems like someone who is not willing to do it is just asking for a handout, and you're like, no, I like to help you, but here are the steps that you need to take. read this and this and this in the help file, and you should be able to make a hotkey that clicks a point on the screen. Because that's what it is. Get a hotkey, write it out in the label form that you learn from the tutorial, and do a mouse move and a mouse click. And those are the three. And just me saying the words are actually the command names. And
Right.
you just need to look those three things up in the user file. And that's a pseudocode, just those three things. But yeah, it can be quite useful. I've used other things when, like doing GUIs, where I would almost make a storyboard, might be a way of putting it.
Cool.
Whereas
I can see how a storyboard on a GUI would be very helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, like I would take some kind of white paper and just, oh, I have a field here and a tab there, and when they click this, and then this happens, right? It has worked wonders for some of the more complex stuff that I've done. And at one point I had a small helper GUI, like you do you remember that annoying word character, that paperclip guy?
Oh yeah, right.
Kept popping up. I had a GUI like, I had a GUI like that was kind of a browser friend or whatever you'd call it. They were, I don't know if you know SAP or whatever, but it was a complex online tool, and they needed to go through different types of steps when doing stuff. And we had people that were really not computer literate. So they got some automated functions they could access from this always on top GUI in the bottom, but they could also activate like a tutorial on a specific page. So what would happen is it would read the page, they would click on it and say, guide me. That would be the selection they made. And what would happen was an overlay on the web page is an HTML element, right? It was just a div that would come in and overlay the entire thing, but with a small piece clipped out and a small, another one I used, a C level to kind of layer the stuff. And it would point, it was on someone else's web page. I made an interactive tutorial that would play for them, right? And it worked wonders. And it was so many things that I actually ended up making a storyboard so I could walk through specific parts of it just for myself and the colleague I was working with. So he was kind of the proofreader, so to speak, so that I didn't need to make it all before he could read it.
Yeah.
By making the storyboard, he could actually proofread it beforehand. So yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember the name of it, but there's a there's a diagramming, like, so to speak, language where you're taught in programming school, where a buddy of mine had actually, he was a programmer, and it, you use diamonds and squares and they represent certain things. And one time at TI, after I had done this very elaborate thing where it was like a, I don't know, 12 or 15 step process, and I worked it all out in my head, like you said, like it was, but I was asking for an example of how he would diagram it. So we went into this room and he started diagramming it, and I'm like, one was I didn't realize how complex what I did was until he actually drew it out, talked about where things go back and forth and all this stuff. But I told him after the fact, if I had actually done what you did first, I would have written this thing in no time, right? Because it was so much easier to see what I'm doing and understand the bits and pieces and how they work together. I wish I had that kind of, and you don't have, of course, he had a certain structure for certain things, but it's almost irrelevant, right? It's just writing it out, and like you said, almost a storyboard of the flow of what's going where. Helps you get organized, right? And I think another one, which you alluded to a little, I guess maybe use it a little differently. But when it's not just you doing the work, it makes it a lot easier to say, let's say 2 or 3 of you guys are working on something, makes it very clear of what, if someone else takes this little bit of what it needs to do and how it relates to the other things, right? I think that can help.
Yeah, and I think that pseudocode comes into play at exactly that point where we need to plan out some specific things beforehand. It can be good, at least with AutoHotkey, where you have this prototyping language that it's almost as easy to just write it as it is to make pseudocode. But if you have you need to write it in maybe C or something where everything just takes so much more code to do a single thing. Pseudocode might make even more sense if you're planning on telling people what you're attempting to do.
I actually, Jackie, and I think we weren't recording at the time, because just before we started recording, we were talking, and you said, why don't we just record this, right? Thank God. But at one point earlier, you mentioned when you'd be telling them, first you do this, and then you mouse click here, this, and you said literally, sometimes what I even write them is the literal code, right, for the action. So it's sort of pseudocode, but in some ways it's not. And I think that feeds right into your point of perhaps that's why in AutoHotkey many people don't do pseudocode as much, because it's so close, it's so intuitive, it makes it much easier to not have to write it out by hand first. And it's not going to take you 30 minutes to write the damn thing, right? Whereas in C, you might forget all the other steps you were going to do by the time you get down to the next step. In AutoHotkey, it's 1 or 2 lines and you're done with that thing. So yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah, and again, AutoHotkey is, of course, a lot of the help requests that come in are pretty straightforward when you know the language, whereas with someone who took the time to learn C, just as an example, might not have issues with as simple simple code as we in the AutoHotkey community have. Someone who has learned how to write stuff in C needs to go through so many steps before making the first hello world. Just me guessing here. I don't know C, so I couldn't really say, but just to make that one thing happen, having a message box as something extreme show up on screen with the wording hello world would have to have a much higher degree of understanding of the language C than someone who comes into our hotkey and thinks, oh, I need an auto clicker. I need a hotkey that can click something. And within our hotkey, because everything is written in the background for you, you just need to literally write the key. Like I want H to click a specific point on screen. So you write X and a colon, and that's the hotkey. Okay, and you want it to click the mouse. Okay, so you write the word click, a comma, and then the 2 coordinates that you want the click to happen at. And that's it. If that's all you need, that's the 2 lines of code you need. You don't need any kind of opening for your script. You don't need any kind of closing for you. If that's the only thing you need, a hotkey that clicks the mouse in a spot, you need 2 lines of code. That's it. And I don't think there are many other programming languages. And again, AutoHotkey is maybe not the most complex programming language, but it's maybe not the...
It's very easy to pick up.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, now that doesn't mean getting back to your click here. That's a simple way, but then you might say, well, what if one time it's over here instead of here, and I want it to auto? Well, okay, that we can add more involved things to that, right? But yeah, it's at the basics. You're right. It's super straightforward and simple. Thankfully, which I think is it's one of those. It's actually reminds me of the whole R language. Years ago, I was working with this guy at TI, and he wanted to use R, and I wanted to use Python. And so we were both trying to learn this, but he was trying to research R he's trying to type searches, but with R, in how SEO works, right? You type the letter R and then the word, but it's like, it's the letter R, right? It's not unique enough. So it's really hard to search on. In AutoHotkey, it's one of the big benefits that the commands are actually very close to the things that you think it would be, like the click, like you did earlier, right? So like, well, I'll go in the commands and I'll search for click, and here, oh, lo and behold, here are a bunch of mouse click and different types of clicking or send keys. You're like, oh, okay, here's they're intuitive. They're you don't have to understand the programming concept of what you're trying to do and to be able to search for that. Right, it's more on the action. So
it kind of feeds into some of the other things that we have talked about in other podcasts with using the code as it was originally made instead of using someone's library. I know we have Chad listening, and that's why I'm using this example. He has like a function that's called M, or a function that's called T, and the T would make a tooltip, and the M would make a message box. And it's great, and it really saves him a lot of time and stuff like that. But if someone new had to make, let's say, automating Word with a library that Chad had made for automating Word for himself, he would then have to learn how Chad had thought it was smart to name automation functions in Word, instead of going to MSDN, Microsoft's website, and see what they're called normally.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, and just because I use him. Chad fell off, by the way. He's not on. But anyway, he both his M and his T functions handle. It detects whether you have an object or whether it's not an object, and will still display text regardless, right, for you. And it's wonderful, because once you get used to it, it's great. But boy, if you didn't know that's there, it can be very confusing, right? Trying to read through the syntax, you're like, what is going on with this thing? But yeah, I get your point.
Yeah, exactly right. So yeah, I think that pseudocode can be useful, but mostly in a communicative way. Is like when you're trying to communicate your script, or communicate of how to build a script, or communicate how should we collaborate. Yeah, exactly.
I think one more though, what I was thinking about was, when it's a bigger type of a project, it's really hard to, someone says, what's that going to cost me? And you're like, I have no idea. But if you do the pseudocode, and then you could go back after you write all the steps, and then you could probably ballpark a time on each of those things that you say in the pseudocode. That would help you not forget key things that you have to do, right? And maybe make it simple enough, or at least you can give them some sort of an idea of the timing.
And I also think that if you're trying to make something complex, and if you're enthusiastic with the project that you're trying to make, you will probably be thinking about the issue when not in front of the computer, either when you're driving or shopping or whatever is lying in your bed, and you would still be able to think kind of like code flow, and it would probably be in a type of pseudocode that you would do it. Just that's often a way of thinking about it.
I think I've told you, but often when I'm working on something and I kind of get stuck, I stop working on it, and then usually I'll go take a nap, and either right before I fall asleep or right when I wake up, somewhere on that edge, a solution will pop in my mind. You're right, it's not a coding solution, but it's like I could just do this kind of approach. And it's, I highly encourage people, especially once you get good at taking, because I take like 2-minute naps, right? I mean, I take very short naps, so it's just it's something with your subconscious, right? You tap into it, and it's really, it's amazing once you get good at it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that was a good chat, I think, and we went a little here and there, but it was still pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah, I felt it. So.
All right, man. We'll see you next week.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.